everyone. Welcome to another talk for the Your Healthy Mind Summit. Right now, we're going to be talking about how it's all connected, reconnecting mind, body, and environment. And this is something that I love teaching my clients all about because it really shows how important it is to look at the person as a whole. So let's dive in. So it's my belief, and there's research to support this, that we live in a digitally connected and socially isolated society. Disconnected from our mind, our body, from our communities, and out of tune with the world around us. We now spend an average of 12 hours a day on our screens, just like I'm doing right now. And that's only an increase of an hour since 2019. Okay, so even before 2020 hit, we were still spending a large chunk of our days in front of screens. And unfortunately, higher screen time is correlated with being 2 times as likely to experience anxiety and depression. It's also associated with lower well-being, less curiosity, and I don't know about you all, but curiosity is something that I value deeply. Lower self-control and lower emotional stability. We're also an increasingly more lonely society. And 61% of young adults reported high levels of loneliness in this last year. But this is not a new thing. Loneliness is attributed to early mortality, depression, anxiety, substance abuse, heart disease, and more. And we also spend an average of 90% of our lives indoors. And just to add a little cherry on top to that, the EPA estimates that the indoor air pollutants are 2 to 5 times higher in concentration indoors than they are outdoors. And this can impact our health, such as increasing our risk for respiratory diseases, heart diseases, and even cancer. This also means that we are increasingly more deficient in what we call vitamin N, or vitamin nature, which we'll talk about a little bit later. So it is time. It's time to get reconnected to mind, body, and to the world around us, and to stop living such disconnected lives. And to better understand how the state of one aspect impacts the health of others. So I'm Dr. Kierstin DeWitt, licensed naturopathic doctor, acupuncturist, and it's my mission to help people better understand themselves, better understand their bodies, better understand their minds, and better understand how their environment and the world around them impacts their health and well-being. So I'm excited to dive more into that today. So we're going to be talking about how our mental health impacts our physical health, how our physical health impacts our mental health, and how our environment impacts our mental health as well. So this is kind of how I like to look at the whole person. Okay, so I start with the inner self, and I kind of picture it as this core. This is kind of where we have the most control when we think about our realm of control. And so this is the mental and emotional body. And then we move out to our physical selves, or what I call the embodied self, and then further out to our interactive self, or the environment. And so just to put this in another way to show how interconnected everything is, we can kind of see how overlapping it is. And once we start diving into some of the more details here, you can see how difficult it kind of is to tease some of these things out. And so I want to lay the land here, because in naturopathic medicine, there's a few key principles that I want to point out. So one of them is tole totem, or treat the whole person. Okay, so that's a lot of what we're talking about today. And I kind of laugh at this because there's a newer field now in medicine called psychoneuroendocrinology. Okay, and this is the study of psychology, neurobiology, endocrinology, immunology, neurology, and psychiatry. So to me, I only laugh because it really shows how conventional medicine is kind of catching up to what traditional medicine and what naturopathic medicine has known for a long time. And that is how deeply, deeply connected everything really, truly is. And another key principle in naturopathic medicine is prevention. There's a saying that prevention is the best cure. And it's important to recognize that mental health is preventative health. Okay, that's preventative medicine. And there's a lot that we can do to help when we're talking about mental health. There's a lot of protective factors that we'll be diving into. I just want to demonstrate how many factors there are, but we'll dive into some of these. And so the last principle that I want to point out is tole causum. And this means treat the underlying or the root cause. And so again, something that we'll be diving more into are the risk factors for mental health conditions. So as you can see, there are many, many. So we want to make sure that we're getting to the actual root cause, because until we can pinpoint what those obstacles to cure are, until we can pinpoint what's actually leading to an ailment, we need to have a better understanding of what that might be. And so, like I mentioned, each part of the whole impacts another. Okay, so let's take a deeper look. So we're going to start with the mind. And this is kind of some of the things, this isn't exhaustive list, but this is some of the things that I incorporate into the mind. So our thoughts, our emotions, maybe trauma, our personality, our character strengths, beliefs, values, energy, chi, vis, however you want to call that, our conscious, subconscious, our patterns and behaviors, again, epigenetics and genetics. These can go either in the physical or in the mind. So you can see how there's going to be some overlap. Our mindset, nervous system, brain health, again, could be mental health, could be physical health. And then self-awareness is kind of the key thing that I like to focus on when we're talking about the health of our inner self. So when people say it's all in your head, this is what it really means. Okay? Looking at all of these different factors that impact our mental health. So our genetics, our environment, our biology, our social and political impacts factors, our psychological, behavioral, and spiritual factors, and even our economic factors. And so for me, I kind of put the economic factors, social and political factors, and of course the environmental factors into the interactive body or the interactive self. And then genetics, there can be overlap with our inner self, but it can also go into our physical self or the biology, our biological selves. And then the psychological, behavioral, and spiritual is more of what I would call the inner self or the inner body. And so when you think about a polygraph test, that wouldn't work if there wasn't this mind-body connection. If our mental and emotional state didn't impact our physical body, we wouldn't be able to use something like a polygraph test. And so this is from ACEs, which if you listen to Dr. Jessica's talk on trauma, she goes through this in great detail, but it's it really supports the mind body connection and how mental and emotional stressors in life can impact our physical health. So, in addition to it increasing our risk for mental health conditions, it can increase risk of autoimmune disease, cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, cancer, pulmonary or respiratory disease, obesity, kidney disease, and more. So, when we think about mental and emotional state and the stressors on our bodies in that way, this is how it can show up and impact our physical body. And there's also research showing how even psychosocial stresses can increase risk of cardiovascular disease. Again, this is just one demonstration out of hundreds and thousands. And this happens in this interconnection, which we'll talk a little bit more in the physical body, between our stressors activating our immune system, again, psycho, neuro, endocrinology, stressors impacting our immune system, which can upregulate our pro inflammatory cytokines, which then lead to inflammation in our blood vessels, and then increasing risk of a cardiovascular event. And again, so now we're going to look at some of the more protective factors when it comes to mental health. So, having good stress management systems, having creative outlets, humor, making sure that we have hobbies, right? Things that we love, things that we enjoy doing, good coping and problem solving skills, having a good communication with ourselves and with our loved ones, with the people around us, having good emotional regulation, resiliency skills, self awareness, and self esteem. And so, some tips when we're thinking about the inner self or the mental and emotional body are starting with your strengths. So, getting to know what it is you're good at, right? What are the things that are your character strengths? Just make a list, write it down. You can take there's a via character strengths test that you can take to get to know what your character strengths are, right? I think this is a really helpful insight and a good place to start before we start to kind of evaluate and think about all of the ways that we need to improve. We want to take a look at our strengths. Okay. And in addition to that, taking a look at what have you accomplished so far, right? Making a good, strong list in your favor. And I forgot to put this in here, but also gratitude, right? Having a list of things that you are grateful for. These can really help us in those times when we're feeling really low, we're feeling down, we're feeling stressed out. So, having a gratitude list on hand that you can pull out easily to review and to look at, having your why written down for those tough times, and then also figuring out what your true values are, your true core values. And I'm going to be putting together a workshop on this because to me it's really challenging to make any other changes to our behaviors until we really understand what those deep true values are, because otherwise we won't be really connected to those behavior changes and modifications. And this is why I always start with the inner self, the inner body, because a lot of that drives our outer expression. It drives how we show up in the world, right? You can think about times when you're stressed and your environment portrays that, right? Dishes haven't been washed, laundry hasn't been done, bed hasn't been made. We're stressed, right? We don't have time. So again, so how our inner self is doing can impact our outer expression. And tuning into what your emotions are telling you. If you haven't listened yet to Dr. Nikita's talk on decoding your emotions, I highly recommend it just to get a better idea of what those emotions are trying to tell you. And then taking time to build more self awareness. So, doing some of these things is going to begin um, to help improve self awareness, as well as journaling, right? Writing things down so that you can start to look and see if there's patterns to things that you're doing. So then you can have a better understanding of when you're doing something and noticing, is it me or is it this situation, right? Do I find myself in this situation over and over again? Maybe it's me, right? So journaling and taking note of these things can kind of help us catch that. And then doing more of what makes you happy, right? I mentioned hobbies. It's so important to have things that we just enjoy doing. And with that, tracking and writing down what those things are. So some people say to do kind of like a time journal, but instead of a time journal, I would do a joy journal. So writing down the things that you're doing and how you feel while you're doing those things to start connecting the dots between, okay, I'm in this environment, I'm doing this thing. How do I feel? Am I happy? Am I stressed? What's going on? Right? When you're at work, when you're with a friend, you know, journaling, writing down how you're feeling, just starting to connect some of those dots. And then trying things like Qigong, acupuncture, yoga, Tai Chi, and some of these more energetic practices, again, starting to connect the mind and the body. And then lastly, building your team of healthcare professionals to better guide you during this process. So that could be a psychiatrist, that could be a counselor, therapist, that could be your primary care physician, that could be a naturopathic doctor, right? Making sure that you have a whole team to support you in the different ways that we need to be supported in mind, in body, and as a whole. And so now we're going to move into your body. Again, what I call the embodied self. So this includes the health of our organs, our genetics, epigenetics, kind of a gray area, right, between mind and body. It includes our past and inborn medical determinants, our nutrition, hydration, movement, sleep, breath, sunlight, which overlap. That can be environment, our cycles, our hormones, our microbiome, all of these things. We're going to focus on just a couple of them and how they impact our mental health. Okay, so again, coming back to the risk factors here. So when we look at our body, the biological things, right? So we think of when we're thinking about mental health, we're thinking about our brain chemistry, we're thinking about have you experienced a traumatic brain injury? So is there some physical trauma there? Is there mental emotional trauma that maybe impacted your brain as well? Because that's been shown. There's been shown with emotional trauma to make changes physically in the brain. Do we have an underlying chronic disease? And how are our habits, whether that's our sleep, our nutrition, our drug and alcohol use, all of these things are contributors to our mental health and risk for developing a mental health condition. And then even going all the way back to the health of our mother, the health of our early childhood. So were we receiving adequate nutrition during that time? And so some people still do not believe that their diet can impact their mood. But the reality is we have this gut-brain axis, and it's bidirectional, which means that they speak to one another, largely through our vagus nerve, but also through hormones, through our blood, through enzymes and peptides. And we're going to talk a little bit about the microbiome here. So 90% of serotonin receptors are actually in the gut. So when we think of mental health conditions, often dopamine, serotonin, these neurotransmitters are kind of thrown around, but the reality is, and we think about the brain, right? But the reality is that majority of our receptors for serotonin is actually in the gut. So we kind of call it our second brain. And so there is this gut microbiome and immune access. So again, we're getting into the psychoimmunoneuro, endocrine, whatever. Because these studies show that when we have a psychological stressor, as well as stressors in other ways that can stress our gut, all of these things can impact our brain and our gut, as you can see here. So the HPA axis can be impacted, which can, again, like I mentioned before, increase inflammation. It can increase gut permeability. It can alter the composition of our microbiome, which are these trillions of microbes, and we want a large diversity of them. And so often when we have a stressor, it can cause our certain bad microbes to increase and the good microbes to decrease. And this can cause greater inflammation, and it can impact our neurotransmitters, and it can increase our risk of depression. And so there kind of becomes this negative loop, right? Because when we're in a depressed state, it's really hard to do those healthy things that we know are good for us, but we're not motivated. So it's really important on a preventative front to do what we can to prevent these episodes from occurring in the first place. So here is another example. This one is looking more for anxiety and how our food can increase or can be protective for anxiety. Again, it's the same mechanism here of these stressors or anxiety, kind of this loop, impacting our microbiome, impacting our immune system, and therefore increasing anxiety. Or if we are supporting our brain, we're supporting our microbiome through omegas, through anti-inflammatories like turmeric, through vitamin D, which helps our immune system greatly, and making sure that we're getting in those good fatty acids, then it can be supportive for anxiety. And then this one just kind of shows how even our hormones can impact our mood. So there's been a large correlation between thyroid and having low thyroid or a subclinical hypothyroid condition can impact our mood and impact our cognitive function. And this has been studied for quite some time. So it's really important, again, to look at the whole picture. So I just want to kind of get us away from simply associating we need to take antidepressants solely. That works for some people, but for those who it's not quite looking or not quite working for, we need to look at some other options. We need to continue digging to see what else might be contributing to these mood fluctuations and to mood disorders. And then this one just looks at the circadian rhythm and mood disorders. And we're still learning a lot more about about this, it's actually a pretty interesting system. There's actually a ton of body rhythms. Even our immune system has a body rhythm throughout the year. And so our circadian rhythm, right? We talk about our 24-hour cycle, and often we mostly think about our cortisol and our melatonin levels. So cortisol should be rising in the morning to help wake us up. Melatonin is what helps us to go to sleep. And so this is something that so making sure that we have a healthy circadian rhythm. And so this is where we want to think about our jobs. We want to think about our sleep hygiene. So are we being exposed to a lot of blue light at night? And that's suppressing melatonin release. Are we seeing the morning sunlight? And um, that will help to suppress melatonin release. We don't want melatonin being released in the morning. So getting that good early morning helps with cortisol and melatonin. So all of these things, this kind of goes more into environment. See, this is why it's difficult to tease out these different aspects of mind and body and environment. And then sleep and mental health. Um, this one I hope that most people understand, but sleep, we need it for our brain health. While we're sleeping, this time allows our brain, it allows our brain to be drained of the metabolites that accumulate during the day. So there's kind of this fluctuation of the lymph that helps to, again, drain the metabolites. And this is going to help with our brain health. And also during our sleep time, it's when our memory is going to be improving and we're making new connections during that time. This is why it's good to sleep before a test and to make sure that we're really absorbing that information. And then when it comes to our mental health, sleep has been shown to help take the edges off of an emotional or traumatic event, right? So when people say you should sleep on it, it's actually a valid advice. And so again, kind of coming back to some of these more protective factors. So making sure that we're fueling our body, we're getting adequate sleep, movement. There's continues to be research about movement and mood, hydration. We need that water. Again, we just talked about the lymph. I believe it's 90% of our lymph is made of water, so we need that to help flush fluid, help with our immune system. And again, making sure that we're doing all that we can in the preconception, prenatal, early stages of childcare to support and make sure that we're protecting our children too from risk of developing a mental health condition. Okay, so some tips here to tonify our vagus nerve. So I mentioned the gut-brain axis, and so a lot of that is connection with our vagus nerve, and so we can help to tonify that by gargling, singing, humming, and deep breathing. All of these are going to help to stimulate the vagus nerve. So you can gargle while you're in the shower, sing. I love to sing. It's so funny because I can kind of tell when I'm becoming more stressed. It's like I have this urge to sing. Humming, and again, deep breathing exercises. So getting some really good belly breathing in throughout the day, just checking in with yourself, just taking a pause, seeing in your body how you're feeling. Are you holding your shoulders up? Are you holding your breath? Are you taking a nice full deep breath? right? We want to fully expand the lungs to help get that stimulation. And then making sure that you're consuming the right foods for you. This is very individualized. And so this is why I didn't put anything too specific here, because it really depends on you as an individual. And this is why it's really great to work with someone like a naturopathic doctor, like a dietitian, someone to really help direct this, and just making sure that you're getting therapeutic food. And then, of course, for everybody, we talked about how inflammation can impact, it can increase depression and anxiety. So, avoiding processed and inflammatory foods, moving your body adequately, getting that lymph flowing, getting the blood flowing, and helping to stimulate the dopamine. And of course, hydrating, talked about that, and getting adequate sleep. And so, finally, we're coming to your environment. Okay, so when I talk about the interactive self or our environment, I'm thinking about our relationships. That's our relation that can be romantic, that can be our coworkers, that can be anything. And then our community connection in general is kind of what I put into this area. And then nature, which is more of what we're going to focus on, but work environment, our relationships to finances, um, and and then also to, again, I said community, but the culture and society can impact our mental health as well. Okay, and so some of the risk factors here when we're talking about environment, so we're looking at the quality of your air, right? I talked about how our indoor environment can have a higher concentration of pollutants than our outdoor environment. So, do you have air purifiers? How often are you cleaning? What is in your cleaning products too? Making sure that um, those are not harmful to you as well. Mold exposure. This can impact our gut health and our brain health. So, is there mold in the home? Heavy metals. These can be found in our water, sometimes in our food, in our environment. So, making sure that we're not being exposed to heavy metals. And then processed food, which we talked about. And then making sure that we're in a safe environment. So this is really challenging when we're younger, right? We don't have as much control over our environment, which we see like with the ACEs study, how that can impact our mental well-being later in life, but doing what you can to help create a safe environment for others, right? That's within our realm of control. And then I also mentioned, I just want to point some of these out because there's a lot going on right now all around the world, right? But these can impact our mental health and increase our risk for developing mental health conditions later on. And that includes lack of community and family support. So, as well as even the stigma and discrimination and inequality and racism. All of these can increase our risk of developing mental health conditions. So let's talk a little bit about vitamin N. I mentioned our connection to nature. So we spend so much time indoors, and there's so many benefits for our mental health when we have more nature exposure and even green space. So this could even mean just looking outside of our window at greenery. So trees, grass, all of that, right? So it's been associated with improved mood, with decreased anxiety, with improved memory. So there's been some studies showing those who they're studying for a test, if they walk around in nature, they do better on their exam scores. It's also been associated with delayed impulsivity in those with anxiety, addiction, and schizophrenia. And even indoor plants can help us with our memory, creativity, and mood. And these are live plants. Okay, they did some studies, and live plants did better than fake plants. And it can even improve our rates of recovery in hospital visits. So, just having a window to look at helped with recovery. And again, thinking about our environment. So, what is the state of your home, right? Are you keeping a fairly clean on a biological front? So, thinking about the mold and the cleaning supplies that you're using, and even the shampoos and conditioners and lotions, like what you're putting on your body, all of that can impact our health. And then again, like I said, how does your home look? Is it tidy? Is it cluttered? Is it messy? That can impact our mental well-being. And then we already talked a little bit about clean water, making sure that we're in a safe and stable environment, and surrounding ourselves with a strong, supportive community and loved ones. And so, some tips here for when we're thinking about our environment are to get outside, right? That is, um, I wish that everyone would just take a little bit more time to get out into nature, into green space, if not for the air quality, which I know varies depending on where you're at, but it still might be better than the inside environment or air quality. But yeah, get outside as much as you can, even if it's just 15, 20 minutes a day. Just try to get outside intentionally for some period of time, right? You're going to have more sunlight exposure. So, again, getting that morning sunlight, like we talked about, and even evening sunlight. So, watching the sunset, watching those colors change, that can be helpful for our health. And this is supposed to say, make your space one that brings you joy, right? So maybe that means making your bed in the morning or just doing, picking up throughout the day so that it's not such an overwhelming task later. And then surrounding yourself with supportive and loving people. So making sure that we have those connections and that we're connecting with someone daily, even if it's over the phone, call someone, connect, check in on people, see how they're doing, build that community, build those connections. And then I mentioned this for the inner self, but this can also be helpful when we're trying to get to know what environments serve us well, right? So tracking your mood and energy while you're in different environments. How do you feel when you're at work? And tracking this even to some of our symptoms. So this kind of connects our all three areas. So our environment, our mind, and our body. So looking at how your mood is when you're in a certain place, when you're around certain people, how your energy is, what your symptoms are like. Do you have a headache when you're at home? Or do you have a headache when you get to work, as soon as you get to work, right? Starting to make some of those connections. And then add greenery to your home. So just having some indoor plants, some life inside your home. Okay, so basically to summarize it all up, there is no one magic pill to solve every ill because everything is connected. We need to look at the person as a whole and we need to start reconnecting the dots to our whole self. So, thank you so much for taking the time to learn more about how everything is so deeply connected. You can find me on Instagram, on Facebook at Dr. Kierstin. You can go to my website at kierstindewitt.com or drkierstin.com. Either one will work. You can also reach out to me via email. And I do have a program. It's a 4-month program where I go through this whole process of reconnecting the self. It's called the Reconnected Self Program, right? So, 4 months, we'll dive into each aspect of the self, and there's a lot included. So, if you're interested in that, go to my website and connect with me, and we can book a free call to see if it's the right program for you. I want to make sure that it's the right fit. And so, thank you again so much for taking the time to just learn a little bit more about yourself and about how it's all connected. Okay, I hope that you learned something from this talk, and I hope that you join us for our live Q&A, which will be happening tonight at 7 p.m. Eastern. Be joining all of our Mind Body Doc friends to answer your questions. So I hope to see you there.